founder of Project Bitcoin, an initiative to boost Bitcoin adoption and education in Lebanon. So please welcome Elie Azoury.
Thanks, Isabel. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks for Martin and Matthias as well for organizing a great conference, actually. We're all having an amazing time in Prague, connecting with the fellow Bitcoiners, and the conference has been amazing so far. We're going to spend 30 minutes together. I hope that after this 30 minutes, I'm going to be able to show you a very interesting perspective of in a chaotic situation, or when a country passes through a chaotic period, to show you a little bit of insights that you might not have be able to get that through the mainstream media or what you can hear about it. I decided to go with the name using really the word betrayal, because that's actually what it felt like as Lebanese people. We felt that we got betrayed by our government first. We've always been feeling that our government has been betraying us for the last 30, 40 years, but it felt real a couple of years ago when all the crisis happened up. And then after that, you had the bank's betrayal. If I can summarize really in one sentence what really happened in Lebanon, is that for so many years, people trusted the banking system, like we all do, maybe just before the creation of Bitcoin. So people put all their funds within the banks, who actually put a huge reserve of those funds within the central banks, that the central banks decided to give it to the government. So after so many years of corruption, so many years of the government actually spending those funds without necessarily making good investments to actually bring in money, without going into the details of how the corruptions went in, we got to a certain point where theoretically on the books, you had a certain amount of money that in reality wasn't there. And that simply, when theoretically you have a number and in reality you don't have that number that actually matches that, there is a huge loss that occurred. And that loss has to be taken by someone. Someone has to onboard that loss on themselves. And this is where the word betrayal comes in hand, because the government and the banks both did their own interest, and it's actually the people, the depository, that actually lost all their funds. I want to just bring your attention to the pictures that I decided to put at the first slide here. That picture was taken in the first couple of days of what started the Lebanese revolution. At the beginning, whenever everything happened, people went down the streets for a very minor, if we want, reason. The government decided to add a tax on WhatsApp. We called it the $2 tax on WhatsApp. Obviously, that wasn't the reason that brought people to the street. People who have been living through a couple of years of extreme hardship economically. Liquidity wasn't available in the country. Doing business wasn't that good. For a country, and that is something very important to highlight, for a country where the monetary currency, which is the Lebanese pound, was pegged to the dollar for 20 years. So that pegging of the dollar for 20 years allowed Lebanese to actually transact or do economical growth in a way as if we were the United States. We were using the best currency in the world from a country as well that actually imports way more than it exports money. We'll go through that in a second. Little did we know when we went to the streets for the first couple of days with the hope that we're actually finally maybe getting rid of this political group of people that's been corrupting and leading us in the wrong way. Little did we know that those couple of days were actually going to be the beginning of the worst years in the history of Lebanon. Whatever we lived in the last 2-3 years were extremely, extremely hard on the Lebanese people. If we want to go really and think theoretically and combine an economic collapse with a COVID crisis that happened internationally, with the Beirut explosion that you lived, it was really, really hard on the people. And we'll look into it a little bit of how it really impacted us. So The collapse started. Banks, after a couple of days of people being on the streets and revolting, asking for the change of the government, asking for new reform, the banks and the government, obviously with a joint coalition together, decided to call a kind of a crisis states and decide to shut down all banking. So imagine we go down on the streets, the weekend passed, Monday people woke up, banks are closed, all your accounts in the banks have been frozen, all your credit cards and your lines of credits are actually gone. So if you owned a credit card, they didn't freeze it. They actually just canceled every single credit system or institution, financial institution that we've been using. And then that was the beginning of the collapse of the Lebanese pound. I said at the beginning, for 20 years, $1 was pegged to 1,500 Lebanese pound. And in the lapse of a year and a half to 2 years, we went from $1, 1,500, to $1 reaching 140,000. We 100x'd our money, 100x'd in the bad way, devaluating in really a very short lapse of time. And that happened really, really, really quickly. And that was manipulated. We'll get through that in a certain way by the bank and the central bank. Those fluctuation and that increase in devaluation of the money was purely manipulated throughout the crisis. So you had the money that started to devaluate, banks freeze accounts, so what you create is a huge liquidity crisis within the country. You don't have any more US dollars to actually transact with. Banks held on to the few US dollars that they had, and then that was it. You had no more cash to actually live your everyday or even continue your everyday business actions that you wanted to do. So that was really kind of the beginning of the collapse. And just a quick graph here that shows really for so many years how we were pegged, fixed. We kind of didn't even think about the currency itself, right? Our mind was really business oriented, how you can get growth. And then suddenly, in a year and a half, our money really skyrocketed and really led to the Lebanese crisis to unfold. Now, some of you would say, okay, but how come you guys didn't see any signs? How come did this happen really quickly? It's true, there were many signs that were economically, to a certain point now, after a step back, that were very, very obvious, that actually we saw them in front of us. But here I want to really put in the emphasis on something very important, is that when we go through our everyday life, and with the hard manipulation and brainwashing that we actually live on every day, Lebanese people got to the crisis within their minds for the last 30 years that the strongest sector in their economy was the banking sector. In 2008, when all the banks worldwide were crushing one after the other, the Lebanese banks were marketing and they were put in the top 5 best banking system in the world. In 2008, we were the hub for the MENA regions. Everyone was bringing their money in Lebanon. What a great banking system. The Lebanese bank were building towers in Lebanon, headquarters. They were opening up in every single Arabic country. So the Lebanese sector, the banking sector specifically, was brought up through so many years to Lebanese people as this infrastructure that nothing can actually collapse. So knowing that, one of the biggest signs that we actually, and I can actually tell you this because it's very important when we speak about the Lebanese currency collapse, because it is a collapse that can happen to any currency in the world. And here, yes, we're talking about the euros, we're talking about the US dollars, we're talking about the Canadian dollars. It doesn't matter your economy. That collapse could happen and without you realizing it. So here, what were the signs that we actually first saw? One of them were, and the biggest one in my opinion, was the interest rate that was giving on the deposits and the 1 year's GIC. In 2016-17, so 2-3 years before the collapse, so obviously now we know that the money was all taken out. So in the last couple of years, the banks were struggling for liquidity. They were asked for money that was not available, so they rushed into a huge strategy of trying to bring in more liquidity in the country to survive. And that was done through an opening of a certain types of investments that were offering 5, 6, 7% interest rates on your funds on a one-year GIC. And that was only at the beginning. And that was for your US dollars as much as your Lebanese pound. If we go just a couple of months before the crisis, certain banks were offering up to 13 to 15% on your US dollars. So they were offering you for a one-year GIC way more money than most of the businesses actually really do in the ROI. The Lebanese pound, they went up to offering sometimes up to 20 to 23% interest rate. It was really a huge sign for economic sign, but unfortunately, most of the people didn't actually go through. This is a bit the list of interest rate that you can see in front of you. The official numbers are definitely not the numbers that we actually live by, but you already see here that by the Bank of Lebanon, the numbers that they admit they offered were 7 and 8%. Because during the last year, a lot of the banks were under the lights that the fact that they actually marketed and initiated those financial products, knowing that the government is already defaulted and bankruptcy. So you had a lot of people that actually brought in their money in the last couple of months before the crisis, that the banks were actually forced to hand them back the money because they were facing actually criminal charges at that point if they didn't end up doing so. Okay, bank betrayals. How did the bank betray us? To start off with the banks. The most famous economic term that we actually use, and I didn't write it here, is the financial haircut. When a country goes into a big crisis, there is this financial haircut that actually the government or the bank execute, which is taking your balances and cutting them off by a certain percentage to do so. I didn't use it because officially the banks didn't apply the haircut. If you look at right now the public books, officially no haircut was done. But in reality, here you see how the haircut was done. The total depository balance within the country was around 200 billion right before the crisis. In 2024, so 3-4 years after that, that same balance went down to $100 billion. That same balance went down to $100 billion, while we know that, maybe around 15 to 20 billion went out to people during those times. So you had the bank that wrote off $80 billion just like that with a magic stick, and I'm going to tell you how they were able to do so. So we said haircut, unofficial haircut. How did it happen? So the Lebanese people, bank account frozen, COVID, no government support. We didn't have a president. Right now, we don't even have a central bank governor. Our prime minister is an interim prime minister, so we almost don't have any government. Lived through the COVID crisis and our collapse of our money simultaneously. A lot of people, even though they didn't have access to their fund, still needed liquidity. So this is when the banks, throughout this kind of year and a half, 2 years, till today, if you have, let's say, $100,000 in US dollars account, you could actually take that in cash, but you take it, let's say, on an average of 25%. So if you have $100,000 in your bank account, you sign it off, it gets written off from your books, and the banks hand you $25,000. I'm using the 25% because it did fluctuate over time. We got to a point where it reached 13%. So for your $100,000, the bank would give you $13,000, and it would write off your $100,000. That's one of the things that actually impacted the balance to go down. And this is why we say it's like kind of an unofficial haircut that was happening in the country. Secondly, lack of regulations. If you think you're protected by the central banks and by all the regulations, let me tell you something, none of that is true. The second they have the chance to actually change the rules and they can do whatever they want with it. Why I'm saying that is that the central banks during this crisis issued no official statement, but different memos that started increasing the official rate. So on the black market, let's say the dollar was trading at 60,000. The central bank, within the banks, officially, for instance, issued a memo that the Lebanese pound has to be exchanged for 9,000, for instance. So the regulations were all changed. People didn't know. We started having, at some point, 4 different exchange rates. And every exchange rate, depending on what you wanted to do. If you wanted to take out your Lebanese pound in US dollars, you'd pay an exchange rate. If you want to take your US dollars into US dollars, it's another exchange rate. So it was really a full chaotic situation. And briefly, now that they use those different tools, so people ended up succumbing to this and withdrawing their money with a haircut. One of the things that the bank actually did afterwards is that, so during the crisis, there was no US dollars except in their hand. What they end up doing is actually manipulating the black market. So for a couple of weeks, they will dump US dollars in certain exchange bureaus that were in collaboration with them. So you'd find the country loaded with US dollars that drops the Lebanese pound. And then 2-3 weeks after, they will suck in all this liquidity, and then you see the Lebanese pound go up. And that happened during a year and a half, imagine, with a fluctuation of 30, 40, 50% every single time. And they were making money on that, on every single transaction that they were doing. So not only that, they wrote off a lot of the depository banks, but they were making money on people's exchange rates during that time. Not your keys, not your money. How much does that fit in our Lebanese system? We lost everything one day: US dollars, euros, Lebanese pound. We couldn't have access to anything. How much is it important when we speak about Bitcoin, the fact to self-custody our money? You know, that is the perfect example with that. And to add to that, to see how, when I tell you that there is no rules and that they can do whatever they want, the Lebanese central bank and the banks decided one day to create a new US dollars that we call the lolar. So the lolar, what is it? Is a US dollar, but for the Lebanese people. So the bank and the central bank said that every single US dollar that you had in your bank account before 17 of October 2019, this dollar, we're gonna name it lolar. So it's not, so we started having, so it's as if they created a stable coin out of the US dollars. And that lolar was issued to a different regulations with different exchange rates. So we started having regular US dollar, we started having the lolar, and then we started having the fresh dollar, which was, you know, the new dollars that you were bringing into the market. Banks betrayed us in different forms, but at the same time, they were facing a situation where they handed the money to the government, and the government was very honest with them and told them, hey, we don't have the money anymore, we're not going to pay you back. This crisis, at the same time, worked magic for the Lebanese government. Before 2019, our national debt was $90 billion. The 90 billion was divided, approximately 40 billion was in foreign currencies, mostly was in euro bonds, and 50 billion was in Lebanese pound. It was in Lebanese pound at the exchange rate of 1,500. What does that mean? That when the Lebanese pound skyrocketed to 140,000, automatically the 50 billion here that you see became $1 billion. So today here, I'm standing in front of you here with a country that, after the biggest crisis in their history, we actually reduced our national debt by 50%. I know that I have fellow Americans here. You know, if you want to learn some stuff about how to reduce your debt, maybe you can learn from the Lebanese people. We wrote off 50% of our debt within a year. Obviously, you know that that is all in the scam that happened, but that's really concretely what happened. Today's national debt of Lebanon is close to $41 billion instead of being $90 billion. People, you start in a situation where your bank accounts are frozen, you don't have access to anything. But one of the things as well that people got impacted is within their pension funds. All your life you work, you pay monthly to supply a pension funds that you're actually relying on when you go on retirement. Well, from the private sectors, it's gone. because if they've put it in certain investments or bank accounts, it was all gone. And within the public sector, it's the same thing. You're in general in the army, and your retirement is, let's say, $5,000, but obviously in Lebanese pound. So when your money skyrocketed like this, you're a general in the army, and you're getting $50 per month to survive. It's the same thing that happened with teachers. It's the same thing that happened to every public worker. So automatically here, you got a switch in terms of people relying on at least a decent amount of money to retire, to almost relying on their beloved family to actually help them. Those two pictures here that I chose to put are the pictures that were in the mainstream media, where you heard of them, people going into the banks with guns to take actually their money. Why I decided to put this is just, I want to highlight the fact that, those were really isolated example. When they first started, every single Lebanese was thinking, oh my God, that's going to be the beginning of chaos. All the people are going to do so, especially that the first two people that did them actually were able to take their money fair and square. For every dollar, they got their dollar back. But that didn't happen. And here I want to just highlight something really, maybe a message of hope for every single Lebanese that actually lived this crisis. Hats off for those people that actually lived the worst economic crisis in their history, but they kept their values and their principle very, very, very forefront to every decision they were making. I have some international friends that visited in the last couple of years, and they can vouch that really after even the worst crisis that we lived, the security in the country wasn't jeopardized. You can still go there and feel way more safer than Paris and London today. While in reality, if you imagine this chaos happening to any single city, you'd imagine really, really big chaos. People stuck together, they lived that shock together, but they didn't go to criminal ways to actually fight themselves off. So really hats off for those poor people that actually didn't know what to do. And they were able to actually live through that crisis really head high and not even jeopardize their own security at the time. I can proudly say that if you come this summer to Lebanon, I can bet that you're going to have the best vacation of your life. And if I'm able to say that, it is because of the situations that the people actually created to make the best out of something that was very, very, very bad. The impact that it did to us, unfortunately, was very, very, very big. Our poverty rate went from close to 10% to over 50%, and that rate is not the official one. Obviously, they won't apply it, but we can feel it. You have over than 50% of the people right now living below the poverty line. And the biggest loss that we got was, in the brain drain. And it is very interesting to use the word brain drainage here, because we are a country that don't export nothing. We don't manufacture almost nothing. The only thing that we export is our brains. We bragged ourselves that we're kind of smart people and we're good in businesses. That was the only thing that we were able to offer people. We are a service country that we're offering services for the people worldwide. And you had over 30% of the active population that left during this year and a half. You're a bank manager, you're making $5,000. You're a lawyer, you're making $7,000, $8,000. Suddenly, you saw yourself, even doctors, when you'd go there for a consultation, you'd pay, let's say, $50 for the first 2 years. He was receiving $2 as a doctor, as a consultation. So a lot of the best teachers, the best doctors, the best lawyers went abroad to work. And for Lebanese people, it's kind of something a bit easy to do because the fact that everyone speaks 3 languages. The Lebanese diaspora is a little bit everywhere. So, going to Dubai, going to France, going to Canada, going to Australia, it was something that some of the people actually decided as a trade-off that we don't want to live this hardship anymore. We're just going to go take care of our family somewhere else. And that is the biggest part that actually we miss in Lebanon, because if we want to stand back up on our feet, we need the most talented people to be around us. We need them to give their talent and their intelligence towards their country. And unfortunately, we lost them, and they all were gone. And the last thing is the psychological toll. Really, it was so heavy. And imagine, I'm going to bring back this again. We lived that through COVID. COVID alone was extremely hard on all of us here. Imagine living that without funds, without government, without anything. I remember for a certain period, you'd walk in Lebanon or drive, and you see people, and you can actually look at them and say they're zombies. Like they're kind of emotionless, not understanding. Like people were buzzed. They were not understanding anything. It kind of took control of. They were desperate. They didn't know what to do, and they were like just following the train, wherever it's gonna lead them. I think one of the points that we can take from Lebanon is really the key to separate states from the money. I think it is critical at this point on that we see it all over the world that the governments are not really taking care of their people in the right way. So really that separation of the states is actually very, very critical. Secure your savings. Putting your money at the bank is the worst thing you could do. We lived it forehand, so we gotta find yourself to self-custody your money. That's the best way to actually protect yourself. And the global accessibility. When the chaos happened, we couldn't wire transfer funds. Or if we had to do so, I had to take my Lebanese pound that was devaluated, transfer it to the US dollars. If I wanted to pay someone in euro, I have to transfer my US dollars to euro, and then I'll have to wire them with all the fees that the bank have. So imagine the percentage and the fees that were getting paid. They were huge. If we want to make the parallel a little bit to Bitcoin, the decentralization of Bitcoin versus what Essential system really did to its people in Lebanon, I think it's super obvious how really a decentralized system can benefit all human beings instead of a centralized system, and a centralized system that was actually led by really bad people that were trying to do bad. And we saw this, that after the Lebanese crisis collapsed, the banks were still trying to do money on the people by manipulating the exchange rate. It's not that, they wanted to do it or to make it easier. So you were down, and they were still kicking you while you were down. So that was something very, very important. Censorship resistance, it is key to have a money that, is not based on your geopolitical or your point of view, and really borderless transaction. One of the things that Bitcoin did is that, for instance, you lived the crisis. I personally was one of the person that benefited from it, is that you don't have access to liquidity, but you still have a business to run. You still have expenses to pay. So if you were at that time in Bitcoin, you had actually, you could tap actually to that resources in a way that actually could save your business instead of just having it. Because one of the things that happened is that businesses collapsed one after the other. Not everyone was able to access to certain liquidity to be able to survive during those hard times. And really, couple of lessons if we want to see, and here I want to use my word very cautiously. When we use the word diversity, it really depends on every country. Because when you have a chaotic scenario, no one's going to make money. The game here is how can you lose money the least amount of possible. And how do you do so is by really diversifying yourself in different currencies, in different assets, but at the same time be careful. Like real estate. Real estate in Lebanon got hit by around 70 to 80% for a couple of period of time. So, so not all assets are good, but being diversified at least gives you a little bit more leverage than if you were all concentrated in one asset. Educate yourself. We've seen it that there were a lot of signs before the collapse for people, but unfortunately, very few people have the financial educations and the knowledge to be able to read through this and to act before that happened. So really education in terms of knowing and knowing what to do with your finance. We've never been taught this. We always gave our money to the banks. That is very, very important that we know what to do with our money. We lend our money to the people that we want to and not let someone else do it for us. And the emergency funds, there is only two ways to have an emergency fund. We are lucky enough to have Bitcoin today, and the other one is cash. I know it sounds crazy, but if you had cash at the time of the crisis happened, you would have lost money. If you had cash in Lebanese pound, you would have lost money. But at least if it was cash, you could have, for example, traded that cash at 20,000 instead of trading it at 140,000. So you could have at least limited your losses. Cash is liquidity, and with liquidity, you were able to actually either do a couple of moves and benefit from others people's hardship. It's sad to say, but at the same time, it allows you to limit your losses in a way where if all your money was in the bank account, you were done. And the last one is to advocate for reform. You know, enough is enough to a certain point. Let us not be scared to actually advocate for something new that we have never been. We've been living on this planet for so long. We know that we have a different economical situation, and most of them are not working. So let's advocate for something new. Let's advocate for a new way to approach things. And us as Bitcoiners here, I can tell you one thing. We have this kind of belief that when the crisis is going to happen, when the collapse is going to happen, well, everyone's going to go to Bitcoin. I can tell you that it's not true. We've lived it, and very few people are actually interested in Bitcoin. So it's a message through us that we have to approach things a little bit differently. We have to rethink how we approach and how we bring people into our ecosystem, because a hardship, a crisis is not enough to change people. So we have to think between ourselves how we can actually approach things differently than the way we are doing it. So, because, you know, a crisis is not enough to actually change what people believe. Thank you so much for that.